California, our green season is the winter. That's when we traditionally get rains. So from basically April until October, it's completely dry. I mean, it's once in 10 years did we have a rain at some point during that dry season. So it's very dry Mediterranean climate. And so this is probably around, I'm going to say late January or so. So we have a little bit of growth in there. And we just decided, rather than putting up fences, that we would just bring in the entire flock. You can see some folks on horseback, and they just kind of kept the sheep in an area there for 24 hours, and then we moved them out. Having that large a number of sheep, it's great because we can, if we want to, we can graze the entire vineyard in a matter of hours sometimes, depending on the time of the year. But also at other times of the year, we could have maybe 30 sheep in there. So we have a great deal of flexibility in how we can graze things, which is a really unique advantage. And we also are grazing other vineyards in our neighborhood too. So we're doing some contract grazing as well, and we're doing fire mitigation with both sheep and cattle. So what we're doing right there is we don't mow, we hardly use a tractor, and sheep are the main way that we manage. And sometimes I forget to mention this, but most of the stuff that I've done when I was managing vineyards before is now done by sheep. And so when you think about all of the equipment and things that we use, one of the things that we're working, that's just in some ways coming naturally, is that so much of the stuff that I used to have to do with machinery is now done by life. And we also have 2 crops in there now. So if we lose a vineyard crop, which we did somewhat last year, we have another crop as well. So we've stacked our enterprises. Anybody in here familiar with holistic management? The work of Alan Savory? Just a couple, okay. Alan Savory he was a farmer. He was a wildlife biologist in Africa. He came over to this country in the early 80s. And I had the chance to meet him and study with him. And he was working to try and figure out why they had such huge land degradation in Africa. And he came to the point of realizing that it was livestock. But then, as a wildlife biologist, he was working with huge herds of animals and realized that, okay, why is it that the cattle and the sheep destroy the land and the wildlife doesn't? We can have huge groups of wildlife coming through, and after they're gone, within a few weeks, everything recovers and is better than it was before. And finally, it dawned on him that that was the reason. It's the behavior of the animals. We tend to keep livestock in one place for a long time. We'll feed them hay and just keep them in the same place. But livestock are moving constantly. So if you took the current thinking that livestock is damaging to the land, and transition that to 200, 300 years ago, then the best thing that we could have done was eliminate the bison off the Great Plains. But the Great Plains were one of the most fertile areas in the world, and it was because of the bison. And they were in huge numbers. But the key is that they were moving constantly. They were constantly they're constantly grazing the areas they were in. They were staying in huge herds, so they were moving all the time because they ran out of stuff to eat. But it might be 6 months, it might be 2 years before they came back to that spot. So that's the very simple approach that we use in managing the vineyard at Paisanos Ranch, is not leaving any animals in any one place for too long, always allowing the land and the forage to recover. In addition to that, Alan Savory put together a whole decision-making process because he realized that really the big weakness in managing ecosystems is humans. And to narrow that down, it's the way we make decisions. And so he created this decision-making framework to allow people to better manage lands. And to my mind, the real reason for the big movement in regenerative agriculture is Alan Savory. Some of the largest names in regenerative agriculture, Gabe Brown, for instance, was heavily influenced by Alan Savory. And so there's a lot of farmers out there that were influenced by Alan, a lot of ranchers. And basically what all of those folks are doing is changing the way they make decisions. And one of the big things is that all of our decisions need to be based on the ecosystem. And just to stand back a little bit from that, that includes all businesses. Everything that we do in life rests on the ecosystem. An interesting practitioner of holistic management is the Sacramento Ballet. So you might think that's an organization that's about as far removed as you can get from the ecosystem, but they're using this process and realizing that if there's not a healthy ecosystem in their area, that they cannot function as an organization. And I'll be going into a bit more on the details of this, but it's in some ways it's a very simple process. One of the things that we're dealing with is that most of the ways that people make decisions is reductionist. We reduce things down to simple forms. And one of the main things that we are doing, especially in the world of resource management, of natural resource management, is we're treating those resources as something that we can exploit. And so we're not managing them as the key to a healthy life for all of us. We're just treating them as something that we can take and utilize for our own purposes. So that's one of the basics of reductionist management, and that's the way all of us basically make decisions. And I include myself on that. It's a constant reminder that the ecosystem is the basis for life, and how do we manage to support that? That's the most powerful tool we have. Did anybody have a chance to read the homework assignment? I think, so Peter Donovan was heavily influenced by Alan Savory, and if you haven't read that, make sure you read it afterwards. It might actually make even more sense after this workshop. But one of the other things that's key here is that once we make a decision, we generally assume that we've made the right decision. In holistic management, regardless of how much time and effort you've put into making a decision, you assume that you're probably not right and look for the first indicators of that. And in so much of the management in agriculture, if you take that approach and try and look for indicators that you're not on the right track as soon as possible, then you're going to avoid a lot of mistakes further down the road. So it's, in some ways, this whole process is about being humble in the face of the natural world and realizing that the natural world is our greatest resource. So just for perspective, on the mountains in the background right there, those are the Gabilan Mountains, and we are just on the other side of this. I wanted to show this because this is in Monterey County. The majority of wine growing there, the average size of a vineyard there is 1,000 acres. And the average vineyard basically looks like this. And this would probably be in around January. I'm going to say the end of January that I took this picture. And you can see that there is a lot of bare ground. And again, this is our growing season. And so what's happening here is the greatest source of capturing energy and converting that into carbon is being wasted. And I still have not gotten a good answer why so many vineyards just will till one row and leave the other row. And it's so much of what we do is just habit. People don't even know why they're doing things. But so this is what we would call a solar spill. All of the solar energy that is falling on this land, the majority of it is not being utilized through photosynthesis, taking that sunlight, turning that into sugars, which is carbon, cycling that down through their roots and feeding the microbes down below. This is the greatest time of year that we can build fertility in most of agriculture in California, and it's being wasted. So one of the things, one of the basics of holistic management is you're always questioning everything, which is can be kind of tiresome to others, but you avoid a lot of mistakes that way. The ecosystem in California and a lot of Mediterranean climates, a lot of deserts, the way things function there or behave is very different than what is happening here. And so we need to understand how our ecosystem functions. And then the other thing is we need to have clarity about what we are trying to do. And managing holistically, we call that a holistic goal or a context. And you could also call it a vision. And there's having clarity of vision of what you are really trying to achieve is critical in being able to achieve that. If you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, then you're going to get that. You're going to get uncertainty and not be moving towards what it is that you probably deeply do want. There's a number of versions of these. There's a great version that was done by an indigenous tribe in Washington. But this is what we call the framework for decision making. And what you can see here is that everything above that ecosystem processes is basically our management objectives, and all of that has to rest on the ecosystem. And so if we don't have a healthy ecosystem, then we're not going to achieve the things that we want to in profitability and ecosystem health. So understanding how the ecosystem works is really critical. And one of the things that we also include, and I've mentioned this, is this feedback loop of constantly asking, is what we're doing taking us in the right direction? And it's kind of like driving a car. If you drive it blindfolded, you're probably not going to get where you want to go. And that's what most of management in agriculture is. It's basically like driving blindfolded. So I'm going to share with you guys the context that we have for the vineyard specifically at Piscinas Ranch. So we have a lot of other things, a lot of other enterprises going on there. But we created our own for the vineyard. And to be honest, it is changing constantly. So I have 2023 and 2025. So we had 6 years before that when we were putting together the vineyard and describing what we were trying to achieve. And one of the things that happens is in some ways you get clearer and clearer about what it is that you're really trying to achieve. And so I would say the important one here is to look at, well, in 2023, we were still in kind of the development phase. In 2025, we started getting we had vines that were giving pretty close to full harvest. But one of the things that you can see is that I don't refer to grapes as our crop. I just refer to profitable crops. And the reason for that is because the climate may change, the markets may change, there's all kinds of things that can happen. And that doesn't mean that we go out of agriculture because we can't grow grapes or there's not a market for grapes anymore. It just means that whatever we're doing, we are trying to especially work with nature. And the longer I'm involved in this, the more I realize that the less that I try and control nature and the more that I allow nature to express itself, the better off we are. And additionally, the more profitable we are. I mean, I just mentioned one of those realms, and that is allowing sheep to do most of the work that we do with tractors and adding fertilizers and things like that. So the key to me in managing holistically and being a successful farmer is working with nature and always asking yourself, am I fighting nature or am I working with it? So just as an example, that previous picture I showed you of the vineyards on the other side of the mountain, this is Piscinas Ranch Vineyard on that same day. We get less rain, by the way. And this is also showing this, for those of you who do run livestock, this is a fence line. This is where the sheep were. This is where they're going. And so I don't know where they are, but they're probably down at the bottom. They're really shy about getting photographed. So I'm going to quickly go over these ecosystem processes, and these are fairly basic, but it's good to reintroduce and refresh people on these. And what we're looking at here is the difference between an effective ecosystem process and a non-effective one. And the first one we're going to start with is the water cycle. And so we have two examples here, basically looking at what an effective water cycle is and what a non-effective one is. And can you guys tell me what is the main differentiating factor? Ground cover. And I'll key you in that it's the main factor in all of the ecosystem processes. And it's not such a big deal in this environment where it's really rare to have bare ground. In the environment we're in, it's pretty common. And so, and you can see all the basics of what is making it, the more effective. If you have runoff, it's not effective. If you have high evaporation, it's not effective. All of those things are contributing to a poor water cycle. I want to show this as an example because this is a guy who's using holistic management grazing planning in Chihuahua, Mexico, which is just south of where I grew up. And he has increased his rest period to 18 months, which has allowed him to dramatically increase his herd size. It sounds counterintuitive, but this is a photograph he did, and this is his ranch, and this is his neighboring ranch. I believe often, as is the case, it's his brother. And you can see what's happening because he's consolidated his herd, increased the amount of animals he has, but they're on the land a lot less in any one spot, a lot less time than his brother, who is probably running less animals but leaving them there longer. So you can see you've got more bare ground here, less overall grasses. In this case, the trees they're native, but they become invasive when you do overgrazing, like is happening here. So you can see he actually has a little bit less trees. But you can see a rainstorm coming here, and where is the water falling? So that is how much control we have over rainfall by our management on the ground. Because we now know that ice nucleating bacteria, which can be problematic in a vineyard because they can cause frost damage, but that is what those things cycle up from the ground into the clouds and cause rain to fall. So obviously you've got a good population here that is contributing to the rainfall. So he's comparing rainfall, and he's getting more rain on his side of the fence than his brother is on his. So the mineral cycle, this is how nutrients flow through the landscape. And same thing, that is dictated primarily by soil cover. If you have bare ground, and for instance, you have cattle or sheep out there, and their manure or their urine falls on bare ground, it's basically going to evaporate up, it's going to bake, it's not going to be utilized by microbes because it's in an inhospitable environment. Whereas if it falls underneath a tree or on grass, it's a lot more hospitable environment for the microbes. And then the flow of energy. And obviously, the way that we capture energy in our ecosystem is through plants and through photosynthesis. So the more plants you have, and the more diversity of plants, the more diversity of leaf structure, the more diversity in levels of photosynthetic capture, the healthier your energy flow is going to be, the more energy you're going to be capturing. So again, all of this is tied together. All of these things are tied together. The energy flow, all of the ecosystem processes are basically, it's just kind of like we've taken, it's like if you were looking into this tasting room from the different windows. You just see a different perspective on it by keeping all those factors in mind. And then the last one is biodiversity. And I just used this shot from Elaine Ingham of the Soil Food Web, showing all of the different things that occur above and below ground. And if you have a lot of bare ground, exposed soil, you're going to have less diversity of life above ground as well. And this is just I'm actually an artist. And this is, the most common, I'm not sure what the most common trellising is in this part of the country, but in California it's definitely VSP, and the ground is left bare. And this is just a really high-level artistic interpretation of what we are doing, which is very different. Here's a picture in this is probably about this time of year, maybe a little bit earlier. And you can see the diversity of vegetation. By the way, before we planted the vineyard, the site had 11 species of plants growing there and 1 perennial. We are at over 100 now. Half of those we did not plant. And we are also started with cover crops before we put in the vineyard, and we are not cover cropping anymore. We get 5 to 10 new species every year. One of the key parts about holistic management is understanding where you are on the brittleness scale. And the brittleness scale is basically looking at, if you look at one end of the brittleness scale, the completely non-brittle would be the Amazon rainforest. I'm thinking that you guys are pretty much completely non-brittle here too. Most of the breakdown, most of the microbial breakdown can occur at any time of the year. Maybe winter slows that down a little bit, but microbes have the ability to break down stuff all year long because you have high humidity. High rainfall is also contributing to that, but some places are very non-brittle and they don't have that high rainfall, but they do have high humidity. And this would be the Chihuahuan Desert, which is where that other slide was from Alejandro Carrillo. But it takes, if like one of these cactus or a mesquite branch falls down, it can be sitting down on the ground for years before it breaks down. So there is, grazing animals play a key role in these environments because that is where the microbes can live for most of the year. Remember, grazing animals, most grazing animals are ruminants, and so they have a second stomach that is just full of microbes that digests all of those nutrients that that microbes can't break down here because there's not the moisture. So as my friend Rob Rutherford, who's a retired sheep professor at Cal Poly, he refers to grazing animals as walking rainforests. So in brittle environments, it's crucial to have grazing animals, in part for that reason. So in this environment, in environments like this, and somebody said they don't want to do it with sheep or grazing animals, one of the good things is things will decompose. You will get benefits by having grazing animals, but if we didn't have grazing animals, then it would be tough for a lot of this stuff to decompose in our environment. Almost all deserts in the world are man-made. The Chihuahuan Desert, where I came from, Alejandro Carrillo is now demonstrating that it was a grassland. And they are now finding in the Middle East and places like Yemen and Jordan, through satellite photography, they're finding what was used in this country as well, but basically structures that they created that were almost like funnels of herding large herds of animals off of a cliff to harvest them for meat. And now, and you look at those areas and there's not a blade of grass, there's nothing to eat there. Those were all created by humans. So humans are the main cause of desertification. But the good news is we can also be the main factor in reversing desertification. And it has to start with changing our way of thinking. So some of the things that are probably a little bit easier in non-brittle environments, or brittle environments, in brittle environments, are mildew pressure. And we do have powdery mildew where we're at, and some years it can be pretty bad. I will preface it and say that we do not spray for mildew. And then pest and disease, you can definitely have more pest and disease in this area. And then there can be obviously issues with vinifera, which we might not have in our area. And soil challenges, because of the wet soils, there can be issues with compaction that we probably don't deal with at the level that you all might. And keep in mind too that you can go probably 60 miles away from where we live, and you're in redwood forests. And so the diversity of ecosystems is very, it can be very close by. So even though we're very dry and brittle, there's places close by that are not. In brittle environments, the importance of having huge herds of animals to maintain those landscapes is critical. But the other thing to keep in mind is, I know that, well, I have heard that bison extended all the way into Pennsylvania. Have you heard anything? And so in order for there to be bison in Pennsylvania, there had to be grasslands. They weren't grazing in forests. And so grazing animals like that will actually keep grasslands and forested areas because they are browsing down all of the trees and stuff. And so they're keeping it in somewhat of a suppressed ecosystem. They're keeping it at the grassland level rather than a forest level, which we might consider a climax ecosystem. But that is kind of a term that probably doesn't have much relevance when you think of all of the biodiversity that might exist in a native pasture maintained by bison and elk in the east. It's probably equal to or exceeds what it would with trees.